Welcome to the Health Coach Nation podcast. My name is Hailey Rowe, and I'm a sales and marketing coach and LinkedIn lead generation service provider. I work with health, life, and mindset coaches and online service-based business owners to help them get more sales, shift their time to the client-generating activities instead of just the busy work, and overcome that social media overwhelm. Let's get into the show. If you're ready to take on your next paying clients, I have good news. My free 4 Basics of Client Attraction and How to Stand Out class is live at haileyrowe.com/client-attraction. In the class, you're going to learn the top 2 traits I recommend for most coaches and entrepreneurs if they really want to turn this into a career. You're going to learn how you can build demand for your services and stop getting crickets on your posts. You're going to learn the sales roadmap I used to improve my sales conversion rate and help my clients do the same. And you're going to learn so much more. So go to haileyrowe.com/client-attraction and get your copy of the class today. Hey, I am live today with Adam Baruh, and he is an expert on all things podcasting. He has his own show called Beyond the Microphone. And Adam, why don't you introduce yourself and what you do, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today, Hailey. So I'm a little bit of a serial entrepreneur. Probably my biggest challenge is knowing when to say no, but I'm getting better at it. But the main thing that I do is I'm the CEO of a company that's in the IT consulting space around like ERP platforms and e-commerce and that sort of thing. I've been doing that for 17 years, and I'm actively trying to sell the company right now. So that's an interesting journey and process in and of itself. But a couple of years ago, I got into podcasting, and that, honestly, I never would have seen myself going in that direction. I don't. My older brother's an actor, and I love that he likes to get kind of be the center of the attention. Because as a child growing up, I was completely happy just being in the background, right? But life kind of throws you monkey wrenches and will challenge you in areas where you need to grow, right? So the podcasting stuff really kind of spun miraculously out of, a healing journey that I had started dealing with some anxiety issues that were pretty profound and something I needed to work through. So I got into podcasting, 2021 as a host, and then talked to a mutual friend, Kristen Taylor, who was my executive coach and now good friend, to launch her own podcast, which I would produce. So now I'm producing, I think, 4 different podcasts, as well as hosting Beyond the Microphone that you mentioned in your intro. And I have a software platform called Podtask, which, also was kind of an interesting story because I created this software platform for podcasters to really systemize and kind of workflow and automate, a lot of what they're doing and really keep it all together, collaborate with teams and so on and so forth. But I didn't have an intention to create a product when I launched that. I just needed a tool that my own team could use. So I got some different things going on right now, but I'm at a very interesting crossroads in my life where there's a lot of different things going on. I'm actually in the process of wrapping up our office that I've been in for several years, a physical office for my consulting agency, closing out of here so that at the end of this school year, I'm planning to move from the San Diego area up to the Bay Area, which is where I'm from. So that's one chapter. Another chapter, like I mentioned before, is selling, my interest in my company so I can move full time into this podcasting space because, one thing that I learned, and this is, I don't know, the timing's coincidental, but I turned 50 a couple months ago, and I think you do get a little bit reflective when you reach milestones like that, and I've just been open to some, what are the lessons that I should be learning right now? What do I want for myself? I'm, just at a point right now where I only really want to be allocating my time to things that fill my cup and feed my passion and curiosity in life. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Good for you. That is awesome and very brave to, go into sharing your healing journey with people, sharing what you've learned along the way, and can be vulnerable sometimes. So kudos to that. And actually, speaking of Kristen, she was on the podcast, so we'll have to link to her podcast in the show notes. She was a past client of ours. And now let's talk about, I want to ask you, because you have a lot going on, it sounds like. You're a serial entrepreneur, so you're trying to sell your current company, you're podcasting. How do you, as somebody who's trying to transition, how do you make time for all of that, and how do you balance that? Because a lot of my people listening here are in the same boat where they're trying to transition to their passion business full time. But maybe they feel like it's not feasible right now. And so they have to be in that phase where they're juggling all the balls. So, and you have kids. You just told me you got back from Disney recently. So I love that. But yeah, any advice for somebody who's like, wow, I'm juggling all the balls right now, and I don't really know how this transition is going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a roller coaster journey for me. I wish earlier on I would have kind of, gotten to know, or at least decide on certain things, instead of learning the hard way, but that's been a part of my journey. But it's definitely tough. I mean, first and foremost, so my company is called Sweet Centric, and, it pays the bills. I mean, I've got 20 or so employees, contractors, that work for us that, we have a very large payroll. It's a very large payroll, and it's every 2 weeks. And, so there's a lot of, I guess time that I need to make sure I'm spending, because I'm not only obligated to myself, but I'm obligated to my employees and, my 2 other business partners, and then to my family as well. So I know that I need to live in kind of that part of my life. Like, first and foremost, I mean, I need to pay the bills, not only for myself, but for everybody else. And so that's priority number one. And so, and it's important to put things in a priority perspective, although it doesn't diminish the other stuff. Like from a personal priority standpoint, what I like doing better is the podcasting stuff. I just know that I need to continue to invest most of my time in the Sweet-centric side of my life right now, and my family, obviously. I've got 4 kids. My older 2 are adults, so they're easy now. Like, they don't use a lot of my time, thankfully. And then I have younger kids, right? So they do, I do need to be around for them a lot more. And so, in terms of order of priority, like, they're gonna be high up there. I will say something that it is a struggle. Like, priority number 1 is me. And I know it's not selfish to say that. Like, it's not like I go and, take trips by myself to just give myself relaxation time. Like, my mindset, my mental health, and my physical health are the number 1 priority, because that's the foundation. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't be able to do any of the other things that I need to be doing, right? And so every week there is an inconsistency that is there, but I'm just coming to terms with it, and I'm okay with it, because I did have a lot of stress. Like, if I wasn't staying on schedule with getting into the gym or journaling, like, it would start to stress me out and give me anxiety. So what I'm, coming to terms with is just, I try to do my best, and that's the number 1 mindset approach. Like, I don't, whereas maybe before I would, if I didn't get into the gym or I wasn't able to achieve some things that I needed to do personally, like, it would kind of get bummed out or negative or play a victim role or whatever it may be. And so now I try to, just always, like, use mindfulness to kind of recognize if I'm going a certain direction, and remember gratitude and gratitude for myself, and, like, self-nurturing, so that, I'm not, if I don't achieve my goals in a certain week, whatever, I'll try again next week, okay? So, that's kind of the big thing, is, like, keeping that mindset, making sure I'm taking care of the things that I need that's going to equip me to be a better CEO in Sweet Centric, and, better able to do all the podcasting stuff that I'm doing. So, yeah, I'm still learning, and it's a real it is a challenge. But the other thing I'll say too, and just as you came off my being a guest on my podcast, something I spoke about in the beginning was being intentional. I'm learning how to be a lot more intentional with how I'm allocating my time, how I'm allocating my own personal resources, my mental energy. And so a lot of that, the way that I'm able to achieve that is with time blocking. So on my calendar will be time for going to the gym. Again, if something else comes up and I have to like skip that one, again, I'm not going to beat myself up over it. I'll just try to get back to it when I can, right? So time blocking, being intentional, and what I mentioned on the other podcast was what that really means for me is I'm intentional with how I allocate my time. So everything is going to have like an order of priority, right? And so what are the most strategic, and I think about this, what are the most strategic uses of my time, and what can I delegate or outsource to somebody else who might be able to help me with those non-strategic uses of my time, right? So, I had an actual assistant up until recently who went out on maternity. So, things that are out there, we discussed virtual assistants, software. So I'm relying definitely on software with my calendar and various ways to just keep me on track with things. So yeah, I would say definitely go through the exercise of learning, write it down. I'll challenge your audience. Like, write down, get a piece of paper out and a pen, write down what are the top 3 uses of your time that you can't outsource that. Like, that is 100% your value add is around you dedicating this time, okay? What are those things? Write that down, because anything that doesn't go on that list, try to figure out a way to delegate that if you can.
Love it. Yes, amazing. So a couple things you mentioned there. One, I love the word intentional. And actually, I don't normally come up with words of the year, but I did come up with 3 words of the year that I wanted to live this year by or have as a theme in my year. And intentional was one of them, adaptable was the other one, and growth was the third one. But intentionality, looking at everything you're doing with the new, fresh pair of eyes. And like, if I were doing this from scratch as day one, not on autopilot, how could I make it more intentional? What would I maybe be doing differently? And I love what you said about kind of being more kind to yourself, that every week you're not going to be rigidly hitting consistent things. Every week looks different. Things fluctuate. There's seasons for things. And one of the things that I started doing because of that, because I would be like you, where I would be like, oh no, I didn't, hit the gym this many times or whatever, is weekly reflection questions to give myself permission to decide different level ups every week, instead of always saying like, no, it always needs to look the same way, but being able to look at my week and be like, no, this is a different week. So this should have different level up that I define. So having some questions at the end of the week to give myself permission to look back and not beat myself up, but keep getting better in a different way that's not so rigid. And the other thing you said was delegating, which I think is great as well. So now I want to ask you, with the podcast you do, tell me a little bit more about how have you gotten some really cool guests? How have you, any tips for somebody who's like, okay, I want to start a podcast, and they have a whole list of things that they think are reasons they can't do it. What would you say, what has it opened up for you, and any advice there?
So I love the way that you phrased that question, because, my journey in podcasting, like, it did start out like, I've always been the kind of person, I think this is why I like being an entrepreneur. Like, I'm not afraid to just kind of dive into stuff that's scary. I've done that enough times in my life, where I know that I've gained the confidence that I can figure stuff out. But, there was a lot of imposter syndrome, like, when I got into it. And, I think I had kind of designed an approach in my mind about, okay, here's how I'm going to do it. And you and I spoke about chasing perfection and setting the bar really high for yourself. And, kind of over time, I realized that wasn't super achievable. And, just learn to kind of just ride, just being okay with things, like less chasing perfection. Because I don't think, that's going to be all too helpful at the end of the day. But, for people that want to get into podcasting is like, don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Like, just do it. Like, there's so many different formats for podcasts that you don't have to like be a certain way to be successful. I mean, with my podcasting and the ones that I produce, like we go for a little bit of a higher production value, but, part of that is because the topics that we cover are important topics that I want to kind of like make sure that I'm giving the proper, respect or just the seriousness to. Like, one of the ones we produce is hosted by Irene Ortiz-Glass, and she had a really tough journey going through perimenopause and ultimately surgical menopause, and a lot of pain and suffering that she went through. And so, because of the topic, I, definitely it fit the framework for a little bit of a, of a higher production value, right? But there's so many that I listen to and I love that are very loose, right? So, as you get into it, don't think you need to be a certain way. Like, maybe if you need a little bit of inspiration, just, listen to, what are the podcasts that you listen to? What are the kind of, start to look for how the formats are different. I think one of the really popular formats is, where you take a quote from the guest and you use that as a little 20, 30-second hook that you put in the beginning to kind of draw listeners in. And then you kind of get into like, sometimes I will vamp on a little bit of a topic, and this is kind of, I don't do exact solo episodes, but I'll vamp for like 2 minutes on some topic in podcasting just to, to share some kind of like expert wisdom, things that I've learned in podcasting. And then I get into the guest intro and the interview and an outro and that sort of a thing. So I would say for your audience, the great thing about podcasting is, monetization becomes kind of, it becomes something to pay attention to, whether you're getting into it because you want to help people and change the world, that's great. And I love that. And so many people get into it with passion and purpose. And sometime along the journey, and this is not saying this is true for everybody, but at some point, the idea of monetization might come up. At least in the context of like, I want to keep doing this, but I'd love it if it paid for itself at least, and, kind of being in a coaching business where you have a service that you're offering as part of what you do in your own work. Podcasting just is such a beautiful way to monetize your coaching business, right? And I'm sure Hailey is something she will coach with you and talk to you about is, funneling, like calls to action, like, setting up your intro, your outro, so that like really it is a funnel towards your coaching business so that you can become consistent in your coaching business, because that's where your true passion and purpose is there. You want to help people. And the way to consistently do that is to build a monetization pipeline where, you can continue to feed your business and know that, you can forecast out, just 6 months, a year, like a good pipeline that podcasting is really going to help you build.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I actually have a training on that. And we'll put it in the show notes. Or if you guys are watching this live on LinkedIn, you can put podcast training in the comments and I'll send it to you. But the other thing you mentioned just before I forget, and I'm sorry to go off on a tangent, but time batching, if you guys struggle with that, I have a training on that too, haileyrowe.com/time planning. But to your point, Adam, see what I'm doing there? I'm plugging a freebie. And that is what I do on my podcast. And I don't apologize for that because I don't do ads. I don't, this is a part of my business. And so what you just said there is super important. And I think people get afraid because they're like, well, no one wants to hear from me, or no one wants to, I want to make it all about the guest. And you definitely should highlight your guest and let them do most of the talking. But at the same time, people do want to hear from you. If you have something to help people and you can reference that in your podcast, it's important. So any tips for people who have like imposter syndrome around that, or like imposter syndrome about just having their audio out there and their video and it's scary and they're new to this, that kind of thing?
So I will go back to sharing the story of our mutual friend, Kristen Taylor. One of the, and I told her this, I got to finally meet her in person for the first time after 2 years of knowing each other. I got to meet her in person for the first time last weekend. And, something that I said to her is, and I think this will hold true to your guests, coaches, because she was my coach. I said, Kristen, I think the most striking thing that why you're successful as a coach is because it's not a one-way street in our relationship. You open up to me, you share with me about things that you deal with and struggle through, and the trust that was able to build between us ultimately, helped me with what I was looking for when I hired a coach, right? But now we've become good friends, and so when I launched The Change, my former podcast, which was about servant leadership and mental health, I had her come on in episode 2 and talk about emotional courage. And something that she struggled with early on was playing it small. First of all, she has a quiet voice in particular, and I think something that I could see that I think she struggled with was feeling the strength in her voice, feeling the strength in her message and her story and conviction around those things. She knows it really well now because we just discussed it over the weekend. But now she's really coming into her own and seeing how by not playing it small and getting out of her own way, she's achieving all these great, lofty, I would say, maybe if she goes back to her earlier mindset, being public speaking, I know was something that she was very challenged with, but it was a lofty goal, this idea of being a performer and being true to what really at the end of the day filled her cup, and she wasn't going to get there if she stood in her own way, and so she knows that now. She's I met her through this program that educates people on how to do TEDx talks. And so there she was. I saw her and 3 or 4 or 5 other people go in front of an audience, perhaps maybe for the first time ever, and give a very polished 7-minute TEDx style talk. And she crushed it. It's a very natural spot for her. But yeah, imposter syndrome's real. But what I love about talking about imposter syndrome is about kind of this mindfulness journey, which is what helped me get past my imposter syndrome, coming into being a CEO of an IT consulting company. It wasn't a natural place for me. I think looking back now, I'm more of a creative person, which surprises me even to this day. But I was also a park ranger. I was a wedding photographer for 10 years. So going into becoming running a business with 20 or so employees and being in this ERP space, I had suffered from people thinking I had to project a certain personality, a very outgoing, charismatic, influencer type personality that knew everything about the software platform that we consult on. And I struggled with that because I couldn't really live up to that ideal that really was just in my head, right? And so, when I started working with Kristen, one of the things that, through just the process of working together that was part of my own healing is when I discovered about myself how much I was passionate about leading with empathy and just empathy in general, and how much we really need it in this post-pandemic age and, where there's so many divisions around us, empathy became a very important topic. And so the way that I got through my imposter syndrome was I am a business leader. I feel a lot of feeling and empathy around wanting to help other people. Hey, maybe I'll take my platform as a business leader and have conversations about mental health and at least trying to normalize, that topic. So yeah, just kind of going back to looking within, reflection, use journaling, use mindfulness techniques, stop beating yourself up and feeling, and definitely never, go down the path of, identifying yourself as a victim of something, because I think we're all given opportunities to grow in our lives, whether it's through a challenging experience or a positive experience. But, you know, we're all on this roller coaster ride together, and we're all here to help each other. So when you can get out of your own way and help achieve what you truly are meant to achieve, like, it's just such a beautiful experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you focus more on the mission and how you're trying to help people, it magically gets you out of your own head and into the actual what you're trying to do here. So, and the reason why we start podcasts usually is not so that we sound cool or we can listen to our own voice. Like, we probably hate that. I don't know about you. I don't like listening to my own voice. But we started because we have a message to share. We have people to help. We have people who could find this useful. We want to help them avoid maybe mistakes we've gone through. So I appreciate that concept to help with imposter syndrome. So, Adam, where can everybody connect with you? This has been super fun. How can they keep in touch with you?
You know, the best way to do so, I would say, is LinkedIn. I try to, you know, people that send me DMs there, I try to respond pretty quickly. So you can find me, I think it's like linkedin.com/Adam Baruh, if I'm not mistaken. But we'll get the link out for you guys. And like I said, you know, if anybody wants to ask me a direct question, like, please do so.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, and I will talk soon.
Yeah, thank you, Hailey.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to this podcast. And if it's really helpful for you, I'd really appreciate if you share it and or leave a written podcast review. This tells the podcast sites that our show is useful, and it will be promoted to more people that way. Thanks again.